Next up in the menu is interval timer shooting, and this is where the camera can be set up to shoot a picture after a given interval. For instance, 10 seconds, 20 seconds are common. And you're going to do this so that you end up with a whole bunch of pictures in a row, usually from a tripod or a device that perhaps maybe will move, and you'll end up with a really cool video. Now, you do have to use a video program to assemble it, but here's our duck dodge on Lake Union at a speed at which I can actually see where the boats are going. And so I took a picture here about every 20 seconds for an hour as the boats were moving around. Another one of my favorite time lapses was shot in India, and I shot a picture about every 12 to 15 seconds. And you'll notice the slow zoom back. That was all done in post. And you're shooting with such high resolution on these cameras that you have a little bit of room to do the Ken Burns or a zooming effect like this. And so these are all individual images that are pretty high quality JPEGs, and just combine 300 or 400 of them into a short 10 or 15 second bit. And what's cool about this camera is that you can do it in camera without any other accessories. We're not going to go into all the specifics about how to program the time, but it should be fairly clear when you're in there. And this is something you are obviously going to leave turn off most of the time. But when you do want to go in to do it, it's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of great things that you can do. We'll do a little surfing around YouTube and interval time-lapse stuff, and you'll see some incredible work by people out there today. All right, this one's pretty important, the movie settings. And here is where you get to set the resolution and the frame rate that you record video at. For most people, they're going to want to shoot at the maximum resolution, which is full HD, 1920 by 1080, and they're going to want to shoot at 30 frames a second because that's what most video is shot at. Now, it's a long discussion, and we're not going to get into it, but Hollywood shoots their movies at 24 frames a second. I know it doesn't make a lot of logical sense. It is the way it is. Talk to anyone who likes to shoot film, and they'll probably talk to you a lot about 24 frames per second. And so you can shoot with that look if you want to. There are also some options for shooting at 50 or 60 frames, but you do need to be shooting at a lower resolution of 1280 by 720. Some of these options may not be available to you depending on how you have your camera set up. For instance, with the shot on screen, 1920 by 1080 at 60i is grayed out because that is only available when your camera is in a 1.3 crop mode. So it's shooting smaller data and it's able to crunch that data a little bit faster. So 1920 by 1080 by 30 frames a second is the standard setting. Well, that finishes up the camera setting. I don't know if there's any questions regarding the playback or the camera mode, but the custom menu is kind of the next in-depth
I have one question I'd love to ask, and then we can keep going.
Okay.
Duke Stone asks, how do you set your own copyright info on the camera itself? Is that even possible?
There's a slide for that.
All right.
We'll be getting to that.
Excellent.
Okay.
Then let's keep going.
Okay. So we're going to get into the custom menu a little bit. And so in the custom menu, I guess just as a preface, most of the stuff you don't need to change. All right. If you completely avoided the custom menu, you're probably okay. But there's a few things in here to really tailor the camera to the way you want it to work. We're going to be able to make those adjustments. AFC, if you recall, is the continuous focusing system. It's the sports photography focusing on the camera. In that mode, the camera is in a release priority mode, which means when you press down on the shutter release, you're going to get a picture whether it's in focus or not. And that may not seem like a good thing, but sports photographers want to be able to fire the shutter whenever they want to fire the shutter, even if it's not 100% perfectly in focus, because maybe it's only 99% and their camera's trying to fuss around to get perfect focus. They want the shot. And so that's the standard mode. You could change this to focus priority, but very few people want to do that. In the single focusing mode, your camera's in a different mode. It's in focus priority. The camera will not shoot unless it's in focus. And this, by the way, let me make sure my camera's in autofocus. In autofocus, this is one of the most common problems, is people are like, I'm pressing the shutter release, why won't my camera take a picture? And it's because you're not giving it something proper to focus on. And so in this case, I need to focus, and I can shoot a picture because I got the focus brackets on something that it could focus on. And so it has to be in focus. And the advantage is that I can focus, lock in focus, and move them off to the side so that they're not in the middle of the frame. And so that's the standard system people have left up. But you could change this to release priority if you wanted. All right, all you sports photographers out there, this is pretty important, and I don't know for you to set this, but you'll have to be the judge. Focus tracking with lock on. What happens with the Nikon camera is that we have all these focusing points, and let's say you've chosen all 51 focusing points, and you've started right here in the center, and your camera has locked onto something, and it's moved over to this place here. How quickly do you want the camera to jump over with it? Maybe it's a baseball that got hit. Do you want it to focus on the baseball or the actual person? How quickly do you want it to jump and look for something else to focus on? And so the camera comes set to 3, which is the middle of the range. Now, if you want focus tracking long, like 5, that means you don't want it to switch. If you are shooting team sports on a field and you kind of have subjects that you are locked onto, you might want to try 4 or even 5. If you're shooting a sport like I was doing the other day at the velodrome, bike racing, where you don't really care who it's on, you want it just on the leader, whatever is closest to you, you might change that down to 2 or 1. And so you want to be aware of how quickly is your camera changing the focusing between different points. And different types of sports require different types of adjustments. If you're not sure, you can probably just leave it on 3 and be pretty safe. But there is a little bit of fine-tuning that can be had once you get into it. Autofocus point illumination. Normally under bright conditions, you'll see a little black square, which indicates where the focusing is, and if it's dark out, it'll turn red. So it just has a little light meter in there. When it gets dark, it turns red, which makes it nice and easy to see, so most people leave it in auto. If you don't like this, you can turn it off so it is only black and, or only shows up in red. And so most people leave it in auto, so it just kind of switches back and forth. Next up, we have finally gotten to the wrap section. This is our wrap session here. And so if you are all the way to the left or all the way to the right of the focusing points, you have the option of going in the direction with the multi-controller that you want to go several steps. Or you could employ the wormhole theory, as I like to call it. And rather than going left to go all the way across the screen, you can just go right and you wrap around to the back side. And so it's a continuous wraparound. And so turn it on, there's no harm by it. You just can go anywhere you want. If you're at the very top and you go up, you go straight back down to the bottom. That's what the wrapping is.
Cool.
Sorry to disappoint all the wrap fans. Okay, number of focusing points. If 51 is just too big a number for you, you can reduce it down to 11. It's not a huge advantage, but it can be quicker to quickly go from one side to the other, but I don't know too many people that use that. But it's available. Okay, for the private investigators who are sitting in cars in dark alleys and dark streets, and they're taking pictures and they don't want a big beacon of light coming out of their camera, you want to turn this off. I know a lot of more serious photographers like to turn this off just because it's something that's disturbing, and sometimes you don't want people noticing that your camera can't focus. And it's very limited in how it can help you out. It's good for maybe 6 or 8 feet. It's not good for very much distance for focusing, and so I tend to want to turn it off. Did we have a question on this, or were you just getting ready for something in the near future to ask a question on?
No, I just had a question on basically, if you were to turn that off, you know how you were talking earlier about the flash and the red eye reduction part
Right.
of the camera, and then that turns on, offering that, that red eye to go away basically.
Right.
If you turn that off, does that feature work if you use it on flash, the red eye reduction?
No, this turns off that light all the time. So for focusing and for red eye, I think.
So that way the
Let me double check.
Okay.
So first off, I'm going to make sure that my camera is in red eye reduction. Let's turn this on. And I'm just going to put this to manual focus. And so there's the light. I'll do that again, just in case you didn't see. So,
Whoa.
and it's not going to have much effect in here, but that's the light, and you can see the delay I press the button and it waits a second and a half. And so let me dive in here and let's see which one are we at. We're at A7. So I'm going to go into A7. Turn this back here so we can see what's going on. And I'm going to turn this off. Turn it back forward. Oh, it still comes on. So it turned it off for focusing, but it's still on for red eye. So that's just for the focusing assist.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun to watch Nicholas and Marcel go along with you in this guide and kind of they're flipping as they're going.
Yeah.
This is really, really fun.
Okay, let's do one more section and then we'll take our break at the end of this section here, which I think is a very short one. ISO sensitivity step value, you can change ISOs in 1/3 stops, which is very convenient. You can change it to half stops if that's your thing. Not really a big change there. The same thing with exposure. Most cameras are using 1/3 exposures or 1/3 of a stop steps between exposures, which is very common. I know the light meter that I have, which is kind of old by now, works in half stops. And if I wanted to match it up, I could change it over to half stops rather than 1/3 stops. Not a big deal. Easy exposure compensation. You remember how you had to press the button and turn the back dial? Well, if you don't want to press the button, you just want to turn the back dial, you could turn this feature on. But most cases, I would recommend leaving it turned off as a safety precaution. Now, one of the options with turning it on is you could also turn it on auto reset. So what would happen, for instance, if you did a -1 exposure, it would keep it there for a little while and then it would reset. And don't ask me how long it takes to reset. I think it's after the meter resets after about 15 seconds. It will constantly reset itself. And so you may or may not want it on reset if you want to make those quick changes. But for most people, leave that off. This camera has center-weighted metering, but you can customize how big a circle the center-weighted metering area works with. Standard is an 8mm circle. You can make it smaller or you can make it larger. Most people don't use center-weighted metering anymore, but if you do, you can customize it. Fine-tune optimal exposure. Okay, so if you find that your camera is just not metering correctly, everything's a little bright or a little dark, you could adjust with exposure compensation. But fine-tune optimal exposure you're going to be able to do it by 1/6 of a stop rather than 1/3 of a stop. So you can be very, very exact about it. And it will kind of hide this so that you don't see it within the bracketing and the exposure controls, everything else. It's pretty rare that you would need this, but it's only there so that you don't have to send your camera back to Nikon if it's having slight exposure problems. You can just do that fix right in the camera. And that brings us to the end of the metering and exposure part of the custom menu. So we'll take a look for any questions.
ES Wally asks, how do I save the settings after I make the changes? Any settings the camera still shows even after I make the change and exit out of that setting?
Okay, so one of the awkward things about Nikon cameras is that you will go, oh, here's something I would like to change, and you enter it or you go to the right and you go, okay, well, I'm going to change it to this, and then you exit. Well, you haven't saved that change. What you often have to do is press the OK button. Sometimes, depending on the menu, you'll have to go back up to the top of the list and go to the Done option and click the Done. And this varies with individual settings, but to make sure that your setting has stuck, either hit OK or see if there's a checkbox for Done. I know I've more than once gone in and changed something, come back out and realize I never changed it at all, or I never finalized it, you might say.
Okay, thank you. And Timinator asks, does the file numbering reset after 9,999, i.e. DSC 9999, and then reset to DSC 0001, or was this just a computer and software problem?
Were they talking about the numbers resetting or the letters resetting there?
I believe the numbers. So
okay.
Once you
so yeah, what happens
exceed a number.
when you buy the camera, the first picture is 0001 and counts up to 10,000.
Okay.
9,000.
999.
999. And then it goes back down to 1. And so the problem is that if you shoot 20,000 images, every image has a exact duplicate file name.
Okay.
And so the way to avoid that ultimately is if Nikon would just put a couple extra zeros in there. But that seems to be too tough for Nikon. So what we have to do as photographers is that when we download them to the computer, we should be changing the file names that we download into the computer. The system that I use is a date system, so it would go year, month, day, a little bit of an underscore, and then a sequential number that goes up to 10,000. So as long as I don't shoot more than 10,000 pictures in a single day, I'm good, which doesn't happen very often, maybe never. And so that's the ultimate solution that serious photographers are using. But you could go in and you could manually reset the numbers if you wanted to. You could have them reset every time you go into the camera. But that would be dangerous because you're ending up with a lot of pictures with 0001. Unless you're going in and manually changing the 3-letter code, which would be a lot of work. The simplest solution is to get Lightroom, figure out how to do the auto import where it changes the file name, and you never have to do anything. That's the easiest solution.